everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Way the World Works, a Tuttle Twins podcast. So today I want to talk about the First Amendment, but specifically your right to burn the American flag. And that sounds very radical, right? It sounds very, I think you might hear it automatically and say, why would anyone burn a flag? So we're going to go into the history about that a little bit and talk about why people did it in the first place and why people are so angry about it. So why are we talking about this? We are talking about this because recently President Trump signed an executive order that talked about desecrating the flag. Desecrating the flag, the word desecration means to destroy something, but to destroy something in kind of like a ceremonial way, or not, that's the wrong word, but to destroy it in a way that is blatant, is to say, I'm destroying this because I don't like it and I want to belittle it, kind of. So again, you might be thinking, why would you do that to a flag? Well, let's talk about that for a minute. So a flag is a symbol. It is a piece of cloth, but it is a piece of cloth that to a lot of people represents this country and the ideas this country stands for. I think there's all these very romanticized images of the American flag. There's, if the adults, for those of you who've watched The Patriot, that movie, which I love it. It's a classic. But there's, the scene where Mel Gibson is holding the flag and trying to get the people not to retreat. And it's like very powerful. And then, even if you know the history behind the Star Spangled Banner, and if you've ever gotten to go to the American History Smithsonian, which is my favorite museum in all of DC, I go there so much I can probably tell you where everything is without even having a map or anything. But it's very big. But there's a room you can go into, and it has to be very dark and very quiet because these old fabrics are so fragile. It's like hidden behind, glass, but it is that flag. It's the flag that, but our flag was still there, the line says, because it was, there were all the cannon going off and everything. So that flag, the actual flag, is in the American History Smithsonian. And it is a very overwhelming, very awestruck feeling for the flag. But what does the flag represent? So like I said, it represents the ideas of this country. And what are the ideas of this country? Individual liberty, these civil rights, these important rights that the government is not allowed to violate. They're there to protect. Specifically, that is their job, to protect our Bill of Rights. And a lot of people might, and whether or not they understand this or not, the flag has been seen as a very patriotic symbol. So there's a lot of people who are very ceremonial about it. Like, you can't touch the ground. It has to be folded a certain way. And if you don't do that, you don't respect the flag and you hate America. And it's this very, patriotism feeling. And I think maybe they forget that the flag represents the ideas that are in the Constitution, in the First Amendment. And the First Amendment says you have the right to expression, to demonstrate. It's not just free speech. The First Amendment is, it actually, for as short as it is, it encompasses a lot. And as challenges were brought up over the years in the Supreme Court, it was even defined even more. So what I mean by that is, it's not just free speech protesting. It's also your right to associate with people, the freedom of association without being labeled in a specific group. We're actually going to talk about the Red Scare in a couple episodes, and we'll kind of get more into freedom of association. It's your right to wear a T-shirt that might have a slogan or a political candidate that someone disagrees with. And it is your right to burn the American flag. And again, I know that sounds very extreme and very radical, but there was a symbolic reason that people were doing it. So to wrap up, to kind of sum up the beginning of this conversation, the flag is a symbol. I think it can be a symbol of two things for people. It can represent the country and, veterans and fighting for our freedom. But fighting for our freedom, what does that mean? Our freedom are those rights contained in the Constitution, those natural rights given to us by simply being born. Among those rights, the right to free speech, the right to free expression, the right to, yes, burn a flag. So when you hear people talking about patriotism and upholding that, and that burning a flag is going against that, I want you to really think, okay, but if burning the flag and if going against the flag is an act of unpatriotism, then why is it protected in the Constitution? All right, so that's the first part. So this executive order, let's talk about that first, and then we'll go into the history. So Trump signed an executive order that, I'll be honest, is more of a statement than a law, because all it does is urge law enforcement to start enforcing already existing laws. And when I say you have the right to burn a flag, like you have the right to say anything, there are some nuances to that. There are some boundaries. There's the famous, you can't shout fire in a movie theater. You can't incite a riot or incite, chaos. We're going to get to that in a minute. So the executive order is pretty much saying enforce the laws that are already there. So there's nothing revolutionary about it. There's nothing new about it. There's also some parts about, if you're not a citizen yet and you get caught burning the flag, that there should be a lot of repercussions for you. But again, some of these already exist. So it's already existing law. So why did it need to be said? It was a statement. It was a way of saying, forget the American flag, America, patriotism. And I don't love it. And I want you guys to make up your mind, obviously, of how you feel about it. I think free speech goes both ways. And I think in this era, I know that I'm having to check myself a lot and say, okay, if someone I disagree with says something I don't like or does something I don't like, my first thing is, how dare they be allowed to say that? Then I have to say, no, Brittany, that's the beautiful part of it. They are allowed to say that. And I'm allowed to say something back to them. Like, that is great. So no matter whose side you're on politically, maybe you're on no side at all, free speech is important. Free expression is important. The First Amendment is so important. And we shouldn't be making any statement that is trying to take that away from anybody, because we all have that right in the Bill of Rights. So I am very, as the kids say, I think this executive order is sus, right? Is suspicious, is suspect. I think it doesn't really do much except for really anger the people who like free speech, mostly people maybe who were on the left and don't like this presidency. It's giving them ammo, to be honest, to say they're coming for our free speech. And I don't love it. But now let's talk about why flag burning became an issue in the first place. So the Vietnam War, and I keep saying I'm going to do an episode about this, and I keep putting it off, mostly because there's so much, and it's an issue, or it's an event in history I'm actually very passionate about. And so I'm like, what parts am I going to actually talk about? But that was a really big time for the anti-war movement because of many reasons. One, anytime you're asking 18-year-old boys to go off and die and fight for, unclear reasons, because Vietnam was in many regards kind of a civil war. It was the country itself and its people fighting over a lot of ideological clashes that, surprise, surprise, the United States actually kind of made worse, because we backed a president in Vietnam, a Catholic president in a predominantly Buddhist country, and that doesn't fly well, and it didn't fly well. And there was a lot of we found out we couldn't control this president later on, which America has done. We talked about Iran before. So then things got out of hand. There was this battle, and we got involved when the thing we should have done from the beginning was leave a country to figure out its own future and to figure out its own destiny. So that was a problem. And then to make it worse, the United States opened the draft and was sending young boys. I don't even want to call them men because they were so young. Some of them were men, obviously. And then if you didn't want to fight, and a lot of people didn't, some people were fleeing to Canada just to get away, to try to avoid this horrible thing. And that made them criminals. They couldn't come back to the country until much later on. They were pardoned. I don't know why I want to say it's Jimmy Carter that pardoned them, but they were pardoned many years later. But I mean, imagine having to choose between your life or being able to live in the country you live in with your friends and your family. It's horrible. And a lot of lives were lost in Vietnam. Not only lives, but you had mental health issues because the young people who had to fight saw such horrifically savage things, because war is savagery, plain and simple, came back and they didn't know how to process that. And they didn't know how to process having to to kill people in war. And it was just so horrible. So this time is very wrought with turmoil from people who were like, hey, don't send me out to die in this war that doesn't even make sense. And so you had a lot of protest, and the television was also bringing all these protests and footage from the war into homes for the first time. So there's a lot of things working. But one of the ways that young men and women were saying, like, this, stop sending our friends, our brothers, and us, out to die. The most radical thing they thought they could do to get attention was to burn American flags, because that's how angry they were. And the government wasn't listening. Power wasn't listening. And they weren't going to get violent, which we love that. No violence. Violence is never okay, unless it's, right to revolution with John Locke and you're in a Revolutionary War situation, but that's a different story. That's after you've exhausted every option. And so they were burning American flags because it was a very powerful, very jarring, very shocking symbol to see in the newspaper and to see on college campuses. And this became more common during the Vietnam War. It really started amping up. Surprisingly, though, that is not when the Supreme Court case happened. The Supreme Court case about flag burning happened in the 1980s. And it originated from Texas, the court case itself. And it was a communist, actually, a very radical communist who burned an American flag and the Supreme Court on public property. And the Supreme Court deemed that actually he had the right to do that, that was an extension of his First Amendment right, that it was a freedom we all have. However, that doesn't mean that I can go onto your property and burn an American flag, because guess what? That's your property and that's not my property. It doesn't mean I can steal your American flag in front of your house and burn it, right? Because that's a private property issue, and that's really important. There's also an issue of safety. Fire is scary, right? If it's not contained. And so while you are allowed to burn an American flag, it's not like you can burn it in an area where you're going to end up setting things on fire and creating a very dangerous situation. So there are constraints. And it's funny because of some of the things mentioned in this executive order were things that were already limited in the Supreme Court case. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And it seems just like a let's make the left angry situation. But the American flag is burning it and desecrating it, if you want to say, is under certain circumstances upheld under your First Amendment right. And if that shocks you, if that makes you angry because you love the American flag, I understand. I get that. But how great is it that we get to do things that are unpopular as long as they're safe? Because anything you do is going to be deemed unpopular by some people, and some people are going to agree with you. And that is why the First Amendment exists. It exists for us to say some maybe unpopular things or do some unpopular things and start a conversation. Okay, and that's the point, to discuss our ideas, to debate our ideas. Let's talk about whether or not you think the American flag is something more than just a piece of cloth. Or let's talk about why you think it's, a symbol of patriotism. Let's talk about why you think you should be able to burn it. Let's have these discussions, because guys, if we don't have these discussions, that's when we turn into a country where people start hurting each other over their beliefs. And my goodness, once we do that, then there's really no turning back. So we need to get back to a place where we just fervently respect the First Amendment, no matter who is exercising it. So American flags, you are allowed under the Supreme Court to desecrate them to a point. And this executive order, I don't like it because of what it stands for, but it doesn't do a whole lot. I don't think it's going to change a whole lot, but it is a little bit scary to even be talking about it. We cannot have people talking about how important free speech is while also demonizing it. So it's very important that we remember to be consistent on those issues. And it's very likely, if somebody does end up getting prosecuted under this, it very well could go to the Supreme Court, and they're going to have to re-debate it, to talk about it again. And so that'll be really interesting to watch. But so we'll wrap it up there. Have these conversations as a family. Talk about how you feel about it. What you believe about what the flag stands for itself, or the First Amendment. So we'll wrap it up there. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast. And until next time, I'll talk to you later.